Who deserved to be the sixth member of Yhwach's elite royal guard, the Schutzstaffel? There's a lot we don't know about the Vandenrijk's strongest unit, the most powerful Quincy in existence, and Yhwach's own archangels, monstrously broken warriors who fight for their god king directly, who make up a small, very exclusive club. Albeit a club, as we've seen, that it is possible for the lower-ranked Sternritter to break into. Or at least it was before they were all killed off anyway, be that by the Gotei 13 or Yhwach's own doing, but it was possible. And that brings us to today's video. Prior to being elevated to the Schutzstaffel himself, Askin openly wondered as to whether or not he would be chosen by his king. And it's clear that at least some of the Sternritter were very aware that glory in battle would possibly net them that coveted promotion, that spot by His Majesty's side, and, most importantly, spare them from death at the hands of the Alsvalen after being considered unnecessary for combating the royal palace. And so that begs the question, were there any other Sternritter among the Vandenrijk's ranks that came even close to the level of power and skill necessary for a spot among the upper echelon? Or was everyone else simply unworthy of a position by His Majesty's side? And what exactly is the criteria for making it into the elite guard anyway? Why was Askin promoted, and was anyone else potentially considered for the role? What did the Schutzstaffel of the past look like, and how have things changed? Of course, Askin comments on being the only Sternritter brought up from below, but could it be that potential candidates had already been killed by that point? A lot of people have long speculated that Gremmy might have been chosen, but why, and how likely really was that? We're going to try and answer all of this and more today, so let's take a look. Before we get started, a quick note, thank you to everyone who has subscribed recently. It is really making a huge difference in our push to 300,000 subs by the end of the year. And if you want to help be a part of that, consider hitting subscribe today. It's free, it's easy to do, and it would make a huge difference and a big help for the channel, and it's all greatly appreciated. And speaking of which, if you want to take that support from me another step further, consider checking out my Patreon as well, where you can get every single video of mine free of YouTube ads. You get a shout out in the credits of the video as being one of the people who is helping to make this possible. You can support me over there for as little as $1 a month, but the $2 a month is the sweet spot, the most popular one, and it is making a massive difference and is a big help to the channel. So thank you all to every single one of you supporting me over there as well. Also, we're doing live reactions for every single episode of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3, The Culling Game Part 1, so make sure to check those out as well if you haven't done already. If you're into Jujutsu Kaisen, or if you just want more live reaction content from yours truly, then again, please consider checking those out as well. Send the signal to YouTube that these videos are worth being pushed. It would be an enormous help in getting some more exposure to the channel as well. Again, it would all make a huge difference. Anyway, as we near the end of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, the Schutzstaffel take over as the series' main villains, and in both the manga and the anime, we know Yhwach's personal guard to be made up of Sternritter X, the X-Axis Lige Barrow, who is their leader, Sternritter C, the compulsory Pernida Parnkajaz, Sternritter M, the miracle Gerard Valkyrie, and their new recruits, Sternritter D, the death-dealing Askin Naklavar, and later Sternritter A, the antithesis, and the Quincy Prince, the heir to the Vandenrijk, Uryu Ishida, while Ugram Hashwal, Sternritter B, the balance as Yhwach's first son and other half, continues to oversee them as the Grand Master. Two of these members, Pernida and Gerard, are directly connected to the Soul King himself, giving them immeasurable divine power, while Lige, as the first Quincy granted a shrift from Yhwach, was blessed with special privileges, making him, in his own words, a man on the outskirts of being a god. But it wasn't always this way, and in fact 1,000 years ago, Yhwach's Schutzstaffel looked completely different. During the time of the Lichtreich, Yhwach's elite guard seemed to be considerably more grounded, and was made up of just 4 members. Hubert Kleich, who was also the vice-captain of the Sternritter under Haschwolf, Johann Ziedritz, Algora Lalau, and Nikita Deslok, all of whom accompanied Yhwach on his conquest of the northern realms of the world of the living. All 4 members were present when Yhwach met with Ichibei, and Xidritz even questioned Yhwach on the need for the Sternritter in the first place, prior to their creation. It's actually interesting to me looking back now that he was the one to have this meeting with Yhwach, that he was the one to kind of get away with actually questioning His Majesty on the subject, considering Hubert would later become the vice captain of the Sternritter in general. But of course, Yhwach's original Schutzstaffel was completely wiped out during the first attack on the Soul Society 1,000 years ago, and now this new, modern iteration seems to be more powerful than ever. Considering Lige was the first Quincy to receive a shrift from Yhwach, it feels to me like the new age Schutzstaffel was conceived with his appointment, but unfortunately we don't know anything for sure. Perhaps the biggest question I have regarding the Schutzstaffel relates to the criteria for promotion. How did Yhwach choose who to bring up to the royal palace, and why was only Askin ultimately picked? Let's take a look at Askin for a moment. Now, you guys know Askin's my guy. He's my favourite Sternritter and one of my favourite characters in the series. But it's clear as day that he's not on the same level as the pre-existing Schutzstaffel members. Now, don't get me wrong, Askin is still one of the strongest characters in Bleach, and is capable of fighting at a high captain level. Thanks to his ability, combined with his somewhat unassuming demeanour and personality, Askin ends up leaving a trail of bodies in his wake, taking out numerous powerful foes, including, yes, the main character himself. But by contrast, Pernida and Gerard are connected to the very Soul King himself, while Lige, as I said, has been specially blessed by Yhwach as his personal messenger, his envoy, and deliverer of justice. All 3 of them are essentially immortal angels, and can return from death over and over again. By comparison, Askin's just a guy. A really powerful guy, and terrifying in his own right, but just a guy all the same. He's not immortal, and he's in no way related to the Soul King. In that sense, then, it seems odd to me that he'd even be given the time of day. Did Yhwach really need a 4th member that badly to take on the royal palace? And again, don't get me wrong, Askin more than does his part. Frankly, he performs better than most of the pre-existing members, especially in those early stages when he gets back up to face Oetsu. And again, I think that's kind of the point that Kubo was going for. This idea that although Askin is very much a fish out of water, and you see that through his reactions to basically everything taking place around him, he more than holds up his end. And he's definitely there as well on a meta-narrative level, because Kubo clearly liked him a lot and wanted him to be a major Sternritter. Plus, his presence helps to ground the Schutzstaffel somewhat, and he acts almost as the audience surrogate when surrounded by these monstrous angelic beings and these extremely weird goings-on. But from Yhwach's perspective, if we try and zero in on the character, what was the point? Again, Askin more than handles the job, but I mean prior to that, what was the point, from Yhwach's perspective? Again, like I mentioned earlier, Askin knew ahead of time that there was a chance of being chosen by Yhwach. So again, presumably all, or at least some of the Sternritter were aware of that fact. Again, it kind of seems like some of the newer Sternritter, the Bambis for example, didn't quite know what was going on. Although it's never exactly spelled out, that seems to be, though, why they were all fighting among themselves for glory's sake. Why Pepe wanted to take out all of his fellow Quincy's, why Bazz-B backstabbed the Bambis, and why Robert grew terrified once he knew Yhwach had ascended. It all comes back to this idea of being chosen to join the Schutzstaffel in the heavens above. Which leads me to my next point. Why was Askin chosen exactly? Again, I love Askin, but he does absolutely nothing in the second invasion. To the point where, up until he mentions being chosen, it doesn't seem like he's bothered in the slightest about what happens. If the Sternritter are under the impression that Yhwach knows what they're up to on the battlefield, which clearly he does, since he sends Uryu to capture Kangdu and BG9 for their failures, even though BG9, by the way, absolutely demolishes Soifon, then it's weird that Askin spends so much time goofing off. Rather than fighting Mayuri, Askin just bails on him and the research and development department, which, I have to be honest, I feel like would have been a pretty good place for the Quincy to take control of. And then, later, he's seen having a picnic while watching Kenpachi battle Gremmy. This is everything he does in the second invasion, and yet he's the one chosen. Why was he not reprimanded while sitting there enjoying his sandwich for doing nothing? Again, obviously from a top-down narrative perspective, it's because Kubo wanted to do more with this character and make him a major villain of the arc. But from an in-universe perspective, the only answer that makes any sense is that it never mattered what the other Sternritter did. Yhwach had already identified Askin as the Sternritter he wanted to bring up to the palace, likely based on an analysis of his overall skills and abilities, and figured he would make the best fit. He was always going to be the one chosen. It's just that he and the others didn't know it. I do wish we'd seen the moment he was picked. Presumably Hashwolf fetched him before the Schutzstaffel left for Yhwach's shadow. If we take a holistic look at the achievements of all the Sternritter during the second invasion, then I think based purely on that, Mask de Masculine jumps out to me as the obvious first pick. He defeated and nearly killed 2 captains with ease, and also defeated 3 vice-captain level Shinigami in quick succession. But of course he was then killed by Renji, so he was out of the picture. But he did well enough that Yhwach complimented him when his soul returned in the wake of the battle. So that's something. Bazz-B also does a decent job absolutely demolishing Hitsugaya, and then, well, I guess that's kind of all he does that really makes an impact. In a sense, you could argue Giselle manages to make the most of the war zone in a clever way, capturing Hitsugaya, Rose, Kensei, and Matsumoto, and bringing them on side as zombies, but then she loses despite all of that to Mayuri anyway. Okay, so looking back, it does make some sense. Even if Askin does nothing in the fight, from a potential perspective, he's undeniably the top pick, and proves why that's the case once promoted. It's also interesting to note that, like I said, Askin is the only one, along with Uryu and Hashwolf in the anime, to actually fight the Zero Division for more than a single second at a time in the early stage of the invasion. And this was prior to any of the Schutzstaffel receiving a power-up from Yhwach's Alsvalen. To be honest, I've never quite understood Lige saying that he wasn't given extra power, but is now using his true power that he didn't have the chance to use before, because honestly, it's just weird. Yes, he wasn't using the X-axis initially. He was just firing actual, physical, reishi bullets. The question is, why? If he was physically able to use the X-axis beforehand, why not just do so? He claims he didn't have time, but that is nonsense. What's slower about using his shrift, which is instantaneous, compared with firing actual bullets? Especially once he sees Oetsu cut down Gerard. Just blast a hole through him and be done with it. Anyway, that's going off on a bit of a tangent. Long story short, it calls into question what exactly the Alsvalen did for the Schutzstaffel beyond resurrect them. By stealing the life force of the Quincy's below, Yhwach actually revives the Schutzstaffel from death. That much we know. It's especially weird, though, since when explaining the Alsvalen in that moment, Hashwolf flat out says that those who receive the transfer gain additional power. But then Lige kind of goes on to contradict that almost immediately. So basically, Lige could always use the X-axis, but now it's stronger than before? Even though we have nothing to gauge that on, since he was randomly firing regular bullets, and he himself claims it's not additional power. It's odd. This is a very roundabout way of me asking the question, how much stronger, in quotation marks, is Askin after the battle against the Zero Division, compared with when he was first promoted and brought to the palace? Is he any stronger, or was he just resurrected? But, to deal with the crux of the video, were there any other Sternritter who could have been promoted to the Schutzstaffel in the past? So the most popular choice for promotion among the community has pretty much always been Sternritter V, the visionary Gremmy Thamo, and it was purely down to his shrift, which allows him to turn imagination into reality. And yes, it is as broken as it sounds. In fact, it's so powerful that Gremmy's core is theorized to be in fact the brain of the Soul King, and honestly that kind of ability is totally in line with the powers that we've already seen associated with Adnias before. Many people speculated back in the day that Gremmy was in fact a member of the Schutzstaffel already, and his death was why Askin was promoted. Personally, I never believed that, purely because it didn't make sense to me why only one member of the Schutzstaffel would be allowed out and about on the battlefield in the second invasion, when it was clear Yhwach wanted them specifically for the attack on the royal palace. And the anime ended up debunking that theory anyway, by showing the Schutzstaffel standing on the stage alongside Yhwach in episode 14, while Gremmy was down on the floor with the losers, regular soldiers. But from a power perspective, sure, the Visionary absolutely works alongside the likes of the Miracle and the X-Axis and the Compulsory. It's definitely of the same caliber. But there are a couple of major reasons why Gremmy would never have been promoted, at least in my opinion. First and foremost is his personality. The Schutzstaffel are made up of more than just Quincy's with incredible abilities. I mean, sure, they all have that too. But crucially, they are all warriors. They're all established, hardened, decorated soldiers, with Lige and Gerard even discussing how easy every previous conquest has been for them in the past. Though I can't help but wonder who exactly they're talking about here, especially seeing as they don't seem to have been a part of the Lichtreich, at least not in this capacity. But the fact of the matter is that they possess battle experience, considerable battle experience, to go along with their absurd power. While the Visionary is definitely absurd, in terms of actual combat prowess, Gremmy completely pales in comparison to characters like Lige and Gerard. Gremmy's outlook is that of a naive child, one who claims to be the strongest and yet has never felt the need to prove it whatsoever, to the point where he's never been involved in a conflict at all. Kenpachi tutors him on the art of battle in the midst of their fight, and ultimately Gremmy ends up accidentally killing himself anyway. Is that the kind of person you would want in your private guard? He's not really the kind of person you want as your last line of defense, or at the front of your assault on the royal palace. And that leads me to the second reason why he would never be promoted, and this one is absolutely critical. It's clear that Yhwach doesn't trust him. Gremmy spends almost all of his life trapped within a cage of Yhwach's making, clearly because the Quincy King thinks he is a liability and one who will use his powers for utter chaos. Now, this is supposedly demonstrated when Gremmy conjures a meteorite that threatens to obliterate the Serete, but honestly, I don't know why Yhwach even bothers to keep him around. If he's that concerned about one of his own soldiers who has that level of power, to the point where he traps him round the clock in an inescapable cage, why even keep him? He's clearly totally untrustworthy, and it really makes it very weird in my opinion that Gremmy appears in the anime at both Yhwach's declaration and the Sternritter meeting. Like, what, does he just quietly return to his cage after that brief glimpse of freedom? While he knows full well that the others don't have to do that? Doesn't make any sense. Either way, Yhwach would never have someone so volatile in his own private guard. That's why, aside from Askin, the Schutzstaffel is filled to the brim with uncompromising zealots. Speaking of uncompromising zealots, well, my personal pick for someone to be promoted to the Schutzstaffel would have been Sternritter J, the jail, Kierge Opie, before he was killed by Grimjo, of course. Now, I know what you're thinking right off the bat. Kierge isn't strong enough to be a member of the Schutzstaffel, and you're probably right. There's nothing inherently crazy about this character, and his moveset and his skills he's displayed, and he's not on the level of the likes of Gerard, Lige, and Pernida, for sure. That being said, his Shrift, the Jail, is broken in its own right. Kierge can launch a special arrow from his saber that, upon making contact with a target, encases them in a reishi cage that, as far as we know, is completely impossible to escape from, unless you're a fellow Quincy. Having an ability with a hard and fast rule like that is actually pretty insane, and it would have been very interesting to see it at work. But crucially, Yhwach was very confident that it would have held Ichigo in place for the entirety of the battle. But for example, if Kierge was brought up to the royal palace, could he have instantly sniped and trapped a member of the Zero Division in his prison? Especially if they weren't expecting anything like that and thought it was just a regular arrow. If they went to deflect it, would the arrow have activated and imprisoned one of them, and that would have been them taken out of the fight? Anyway, Kierge's Shrift is really one of the last reasons I would promote him. For starters, he is, like the other Schutzstaffel members for the most part, unflinchingly loyal to Yhwach, willing to fight and die for his king in order to fulfill his mission. On top of that, unlike a lot of the Sternritter, Kierge actually seems to command a modicum of respect from Yhwach himself, and that tracks with much of the information that we've learned about Kierge from Club Outside since the manga ended, wherein Kubo does nothing but hype this man up. For example, Kierge was able to use Ranso Tengai because he was the combat instructor for the Sternritter, and even taught some of the current Sternritter how to fight. Not only that, but according to Kubo, the unique ability of Kierge's Volstendish Piskiel is that it has the, and I quote, highest capacity for the capture and enslavement of reishi among all Quincy. Which is actually, that is pretty insane when you think about it. Among all Quincy? Presumably that's not including Yhwach, as Yhwach doesn't have a Volstendish, and that's what we're talking about here. But of course this all goes hand in hand with the theme of domination and control that permeates this character. He's all about subjugating and ruling over others. Through the jail, through Sklaverai, and again this tracks, but it's still a hugely impressive statement. And so for me, that's why Kierge makes a ton of sense. No, he's not as powerful as the other Schutzstaffel members, but it's pretty clear he's part of the old guard. He'd be the Schutzstaffel member who represented the traditional Quincy, and among them all, that's what he would excel in. Traditional, orthodox Quincy techniques, and the dominion over reishi. Plus, Yhwach trusts him enough to handle not only the entire Waco Mundo operation, but also to hold Ichigo back as well. This is a man who gets stuff done, which is way more than can be said for Gremmy. But after Gremmy and Kierge, honestly the landscape gets a lot emptier, and it is tougher to really see any potential candidates at all. Like I said earlier, Mask de Masculine felt like a possibility, but again, that's really only from a sheer power perspective, and even then, in the grand scheme of things, he isn't as strong as the rest of the Schutzstaffel. There's just something about Mask where, despite his pedigree, and there's no denying his showing was impressive, despite that, I can't see him among the Schutzstaffel. I would have said it's because he comes across as so inherently unserious, but then there's a man essentially dressed as Thor among them, so I don't think that counts for much. But maybe it is the fact that Mask kind of feels like a discounted version of Gerard, despite being introduced first. The Miracle reminds me of the Superstar, only it's better in basically every single way. And then there's Bazz-B, but again, he doesn't really make the cut either in my eyes. Yes, he is very strong, yes, he's a very skilled fighter, and yes, the heat is an excellent and versatile Shrift, but it's not broken enough for the Schutzstaffel. In fact, it's not broken at all, really. And that's a real problem for the caliber of this unit overall. Bazz-B feels like a very balanced Sternritter, and that kind of means that he's lacking something the rest of the Schutzstaffel members, even Askin, possess. As we mentioned earlier, Askin is just a guy, but his Shrift is totally busted. Bazz-B's Shrift is just really good, and he's just a guy. Plus, Bazz-B's a little like Gremmy in that I seriously doubt Yhwach trusts him, and certainly not enough to give him a high-ranking position like that. I mean, Bazz-B tried to assassinate him over 1,000 years ago. Maybe Yhwach still remembers that. But anyway, that's it for today's video, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Ultimately, for me, the best choice for the Schutzstaffel outside of the ones we already have, if Yhwach was forced to choose another member, would have been Kierge Opie while he was still alive. He's not as powerful, but in my opinion he fits every other criteria perfectly and even excels them in some ways. Him being the best Quincy of them all at racial enslavement and domination is a big, big deal, considering that's kind of the bread and butter of the Quincy. The jail is a broken shrift in its own way, and if it does work in the way we suspect it does, and there's no reason to believe it doesn't since Yhwach outright says it, then yeah, it's pretty broken, and would be really, really powerful in virtually every single circumstance. It just so happens that the one person he used it on ended up awakening secret latent Quincy power. Gremmy is a decent choice from a power and ability perspective, but I think he flunks it in pretty much every other way. So in my opinion, he was never likely to be promoted. Then you have other characters who kind of are a tier or so lower, Master Masculine, Bazz-B maybe. But again, I don't think any of these characters quite have the all-encompassing skill set necessary to be promoted. Maybe you think I'm wrong, maybe you think I left someone out, I forgot someone. Do let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to read them. Alright everyone, but once again, thank you so very much for watching. I really do appreciate you being here. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you enjoyed this video. Maybe you're new here, or maybe you just haven't yet hit that button. I really would appreciate it. It does mean everything. It's so easy to do. And again, I really would appreciate it. Consider checking out my Patreon as well and supporting it over there, just like all of these people are doing. Again, I really do appreciate all of your support. You're making this channel run when things are a little tough over here on YouTube recently. So again, thank you so very much. The $2 a month tier is absolutely the most popular choice, and it goes a very long way to helping to keep the lights on. So thank you all so very much. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.